What was the first Japanese production car? What was the first car from your favorite Japanese brand? We're going to answer those questions today as we look back at the first production vehicle from every major Japanese brand. I'm going to present these cars in order of most recent to oldest as we work our way backwards in time and eventually find ourselves face to face with the oldest Japanese production car. Let's just get right into it. Honda began development on their first production car partially in response to Japan's People's Car program, a program put forth by Japan's Ministry of International Trade and Industry in May of 1955. To qualify for this program, automakers had to produce a vehicle that could seat 4, have a top speed of 100 kilometers an hour or higher, use a 350 to 500cc engine, and have a retail price below 250,000 yen. All cars that met these standards would then be put into some sort of contest where they would be evaluated through prototype testing, and the selected winner would be backed by government funding for mass production. Now, this never actually happened because the industry came to the conclusion in September of 1955 that a people's car priced under 250,000 yen would be impossible. Still, this program was the catalyst that really ramped up key car development in Japan, and resulted eventually in several manufacturers releasing their first production vehicle. Now, I realize this two-seater truck would not have met the requirements for this program, but neither would any of the key cars you're going to see in this video. The plan was cancelled before Honda really began serious development on this model. After the program was cancelled, Honda took their time in developing their first car. Mr. Honda himself said we shouldn't rush into auto production until we conduct thorough research and are absolutely confident that every requirement has been fulfilled, including the performance of our cars in production facilities. After hiring close to 50 engineers between 1957 and 1958, Honda spent the next few years developing prototypes. On October 25th, 1962, at the 9th Annual Japan National Auto Show, Honda displayed their first 3 automobiles. The S360 Roadster, which never made it into production, the S500 Roadster, their first Roadster and I guess technically their first car model, and the T360 pickup truck, which beat the S500 to market by about 4 months, earning it the title of being Honda's first production vehicle, going into production in June of 1963. Now, most people think of air-cooled motorcycle engines when they think of Honda's early vehicles, and while many of their early vehicles do use air-cooled engines, Honda's very first couple of production vehicles do not. The T360 was powered by the 354cc AK250E. This is in fact Honda's first water-cooled engine. It made about 30 horsepower and 19 pound-feet of torque. Peak power output arrived at 8,500 RPM and peak torque at about 6,000. This was actually a dual overhead cam engine, and in fact it was Japan's first water-cooled twin-cam engine. It also had quad carburetors. I'm sure those are fun to sync up. The exhaust manifold pipes were intertwined in such a way to ensure equal length for maximum horsepower output that on Honda's global press site they actually refer to this exhaust system as octopus legs. The transmission was a 4-speed manual shifted from the column. The engine in this truck is mid-mounted and it's accessed by folding down the bench seat. Up front underneath this clamshell hood is where you'll find the spare tire. This is kind of a cool looking truck, I think. There is only one color option, this one, which was called May Blue. It's a nice color. Despite only offering one color, this truck did come in 5 different variations. There was the conventional pickup truck model, a flatbed called the T360F, a flatbed with folding sides called the T360H, a covered van, the T360V, and a snow crawler version with tracks on the rear. That version was quite a bit more expensive, so it sold in far fewer numbers and is pretty rare because of that, but man, is it cool! Another variation of this truck which went on sale in 1964 was the T500. As the name would suggest, it uses a larger 531cc version of this engine, which actually excluded it from Japan's kei car class at the time. It was mainly intended for export markets. This engine was a down-tuned version of the S500 Roadster engine and made about 37 horsepower in the truck application and redlined at 9,000 RPM. All T500s were painted in what Honda called moss green. It's seafoam! Okay. Aside from being a different color and having a larger engine, the T500 also had a rear overhang that was about 8 inches longer since it wasn't conforming to kei car regulations. The T500 came in only 2 variations, the conventional pickup or the folding side flatbed, the T500F. The English language export brochure for the T500 boasts a top speed of 105 kilometers an hour and a 400 meter or quarter mile acceleration of just 25 seconds. And it's comfortable too. just like riding in your family sedan. The T360 and 500 were produced until November of 1967 when they were replaced by the TN360. This one was an air-cooled truck. The first car that Isuzu ever assembled was the Wolseley A9 all the way back in 1922. Isuzu credits this as being Japan's first locally built passenger car, although some other manufacturers like Mitsubishi, as you'll see later in the video, disagree with this. But first locally assembled passenger car or not, I'm not counting this as Isuzu's first vehicle because the Wolseley A9 is actually a British car. The Model A9 was built under license by Isuzu's antecedent company as part of a joint venture with the British automaker. Isuzu didn't build their next model until after the war in 1953 when they began building the Hillman Minx, but this was another British car built under license from the Roots Auto Group. Isuzu's first independent design was the Isuzu Bellel, which came out in 1961. It originally came just as a four-door sedan, but soon after became available in a station wagon as well called the Bellel Express. Upper model deluxe versions, like this one pictured here, had two-tone paint from the factory. This was a more upscale model compared to most of the other ones that I'll be covering in this video. Since it had a larger displacement engine for the time, it had to justify Japan's yearly road tax, and as such it was intended to compete with the Toyota Crown, Nissan Cedric, and Prince Gloria. Keyword there is intended. The interior features a rather plain bench seat, but there are diamond-stitched door panel coverings, a fairly decent array of analog gauges, and even an analog clock. There were 3 different engines offered initially, all overhead valve designs. There were 1.5-liter and 2-liter gasoline engines, both of which used Bosch fuel injection, and a diesel engine which equipped the majority of sales. This was actually the first diesel automobile in Japan. The original diesel engine was the DL200, but later models featured the newer DL201, although I couldn't find which year they made the change. All engines were paired to a 4-speed manual shifted from the column. The chassis and suspension was heavily modeled after the Hillman Minx. In Japan, it ended up being most commonly sold for commercial applications, such as taxi cabs, but a small amount of them were exported to the US between 1964 and 1965. It appears that US gasoline models used a 3-speed transmission and were not fuel injected. They came in either single or dual carb versions, single carb ones apparently making 88 horsepower and dual carb engines 98. I have a feeling those are very generous numbers measured at the crank with no accessories and no load. Shockingly, as of 2025, there was at least one survivor still in the US, which sold on Bring a Trailer for $3,100. In late 1965, the Bellel was refreshed and given a more upscale look, with vertically oriented quad headlights. They revised the interior with a new gauge cluster design and much nicer looking seats. I think this version does look better, but unfortunately Isuzu didn't have their quality control nailed down yet. Paint issues, leaking weather seals, and cracking A-pillars were all common defects. The harshness, noise, and vibration from the diesel engine was bad enough that passengers started avoiding taxi cabs if they were Bellels, which resulted in taxi drivers soon wanting nothing to do with them either. That was a problem for Isuzu since taxi cabs were this car's biggest market. Isuzu did manage to sell 37,206 Bellels over its 6-year run, which ended in 1967, but by the end they were having to offer massive discounts, even a rumored buy 2 get 1 free promotion to government agencies. The Isuzu Florian, which went on sale in 1967, became the Bellel's replacement. Mazda got their start in the 1920s as a cork manufacturer in Hiroshima under the name Toyo Cork Kogyo Company. Yes, you heard that correct. Corks. Like what you would put in a wine bottle. Now, I don't know if they actually made wine bottle corks or not, but they definitely produced compressed corkboard. This is why the Mazda MX-30 has some cork interior trim. It's supposed to be like a callback sort of thing, but of course in reality, all it is very stupid.
It's not stupid. The whole car should be made of cork as far as I'm concerned. Don't you know cork is an environmentally friendly, sustainable material?
They weren't particularly successful at that, it seems, because in the late 1920s, 1930s, they had to be bailed out from bankruptcy. After that, I guess they decided to diversify because they started manufacturing machine tools, and in 1931 made their first vehicle, a three-wheeler called the Mazda Go rickshaw. Mazda branding first appeared on these trucks in the 30s, but Toyo Kogyo didn't officially change their company name to Mazda until much later, 1984 actually. You might be noticing the Mitsubishi logo behind the Mazda name, and that's because Mazda had an agreement with Mitsubishi at the time, who actually handled distribution and sales of these until 1937. Mazda's aspirations to start producing passenger cars and trucks had to be put on hold for a while during World War II, as like most Japanese manufacturers, they were ordered to produce weapons as well as three-wheeled trucks for the military. When the war was over, despite being located in Hiroshima, Mazda's plant was actually still standing because it was protected by a hill which shielded it from the blast and the fallout. The surrounding community was devastated though, and in the aftermath the plant was used as a field hospital for a while. Shortly after, Mazda once again began producing three-wheeled trucks, which played a big role in cleaning up and rebuilding the city. Their first truck with four wheels came along in 1950. That means, since I'm not counting three-wheelers or motorcycles in this video, this is technically Mazda's first production vehicle. The R360 is usually the model that gets credited as Mazda's first production vehicle, and it's obviously their first passenger car. And the R360 is the model I'm going to focus on here because, well, frankly, there isn't much to say about this truck, and I don't even know how widely distributed it was. It had a 1.2 liter engine, a 1-ton load capacity, and as you can see, it had open sides with a canvas roof. Mazda also continued to produce a number of other three-wheeled trucks throughout the 1950s, and then in 1960, they released the R360 Coupe, which is the model Mazda themselves credit as their first passenger car. In fact, if you bought a 100th edition Mazda product in 2020, you got a little model R360 like this one. This used a 356cc V-twin engine. It was an air-cooled overhead valve pushrod engine and produced 16 horsepower and 16 pound-feet of torque. This was a rear-engine, rear-drive car, and it came in either a 4-speed manual or a 2-speed automatic known as the Mazda Torque Drive. It was designed to be a lightweight, low-cost vehicle, and while it had back seats, you wouldn't really want to sit back there. Actually, I'm not really sure if you'd really want to sit in the front seat of one of these things either. The engine and much of the chassis was made from aluminum, and even the windows were made from acrylics rather than glass to reduce weight and cost. It was priced at 300,000 yen, and due to its affordability, it was pretty successful in its first year. Finally, a car for the salaryman. It sold 23,417 units in its first year, but sales soon dipped when the Subaru 360 began to take over the key car market. It remained in full production from 1960 to 1966, and then from 66 to 69, automatic versions could be special ordered for disabled drivers. Subaru started working on their first passenger car back in 1952, and their first prototype was the Subaru 1500. Plans to bring this car to market were abandoned in the mid-50s due to concerns about its market competitiveness and profitability, particularly when Japan enacted the Road Traffic Control Act in 1954, which capped key car engine displacement at 360cc, hence why you're repeatedly seeing the number 360 in this video. In response to these regulations and the People's Car Plan, Subaru began designing a lightweight 4-seater passenger car that would use a 356cc engine. Subaru repurposed their production line of 250cc scooter engines to manufacture this new engine, which was designated the EK31. This was an air-cooled 2-stroke engine, an inline 2-cylinder which was rated at 16 horsepower and 18 pound-feet of torque. Punch it, Margaret! The fuel tank lid doubled as a measuring cup for your gas-oil mixing convenience. The Subaru 360 went on sale in Japan on March 3rd, 1958. This is another rear-engine key car that sort of looks like a Japanese Beetlebug, but it's much smaller, much slower, and much worse. The interior is, well, pretty basic. It looks like a speedo and odometer were all the instruments you got in the early models. I don't even see a fuel gauge. The transmission was either a 4-speed manual or an optional 3-speed auto clutch transmission, which is basically a 3-speed shifter without a clutch pedal. Later model years get a revised dash with a new cluster, and on this one I can spot a fuel gauge, as well as oil pressure and charging dummy lights. Heater controls were floor mounted, and there was also a floor mounted fuel cutoff since the fuel system gravity fed the engine without a fuel pump. In 1960, horsepower increased to 18 and then all the way up to 20 in 1964. 1964. Also starting in 1964, the 360 engine received what was called the Subaru-matic lubrication system, which eliminated the need to pre-mix your fuel. Oil was added to a separate tank and then fed into the crankcase through an oil pump that was connected to the throttle via an oil control cable. Believe it or not, starting in 1968, these were actually exported to the US market, which seems pretty ridiculous.
And all kinds of people are driving Subarus, for all kinds of reasons. Including some very groovy chicks.
This car was hardly appropriate for the American market, and was frankly quite dangerous to drive on American roads due to being so small and underpowered. Something like this could work in Japan at the time because the cars were smaller, the speed limits were much lower, and the average travel distance was much shorter. But in America, Consumer Reports branded them as not acceptable due to safety concerns and lack of power and called them the most unsafe car in America. Road and Track tested a 0 to 50, not even 0 to 60 time of 36.7 seconds. 0 to 60 was pretty much infinity. 60 miles an hour was this car's top speed. In an export market brochure, which I think is from 68 or 69, Subaru boasts that while they've made numerous engineering enhancements to the car over its run, the body styling remains unchanged since 1958 because they couldn't find a good reason for changing it. It looks like they eventually just decided to embrace its ugliness with advertisements like this.
We call it cheap and ugly. But 66 miles per gallon sounds pretty good to anybody interested in economy.
A few variations were produced throughout the 1960s. There was the deluxe and super deluxe models, which basically just had nicer interiors and a little bit more standard equipment. There was a folding top convertible model, a wagon model called the 360 Custom, and in 1968, Subaru made two sport models, the Young S and the Young SS. The Young S had a slightly upgraded engine designated as the EK32 with a higher compression ratio, making 25 horsepower. This model got a tachometer as well as a black and white striped roof. The Young SS had this same upgraded engine but with chromed cylinders and dual carburetors, producing a rocketing 35 horsepower.
Take a look at this baby. 360 conformation, sports car styling. The Subaru 360 Super Sport, concave racing roof with racing stripe. Now, watch her go.
They also made truck and van models off this platform called the Sambar, but they were usually known as the 360 truck and 360 van in America. Yes, they exported those here in the late 60s too. Needless to say, these cars weren't too well received in America. Many ended up sitting on dealer lots unsold for years, but in Japan, the market which they were actually designed for, they sold well and remained in production all the way until 1971.
The little Subaru goes anywhere and parks anywhere. If you're young where it counts, the Subaru Sport is a grabber. It delivers 360 economy and Grand Prix excitement.
This one's another 360cc kei car built for Japan's People's Car program. Meet the Suzulight SF. Suzuki used Suzulight branding on their early kei cars, and SF stood for Suzuki four-wheeled car. What? No, it doesn't. Oh, well, yeah, I guess it kind of doesn't. Having previously built only motorcycles, this would be Suzuki's first entry into the world of four wheels. You'll learn throughout this video that many early Japanese cars were modeled off American or European cars. Essentially, that's how they learned to make cars, and this one is no exception. This car was modeled closely off the Lloyd 400, a car produced by German auto manufacturer Borgward. The engine was, let's call it borrowed from the Lloyd 400, essentially a narrow bored copy to get the displacement down to Japanese kei car spec. Similar to the Subaru, this was another air-cooled two-stroke two-cylinder, so get your mixing cups ready. Horsepower for the early model years was 16 and the transmission was a 3-speed manual. Differing from some of the other kei cars we've looked at here, this was a front-engine front-wheel drive layout. While the engine may have been a little primitive, this car actually shared the rather advanced for the time double wishbone coil-sprung suspension and rack and pinion steering from the Lloyd 400. The SF went into production in October of 1955, and initially there were 3 body styles: a light van, I know this doesn't look much like a van, but that's what they called it, a pickup, and a sedan. But the sedan and pickup versions were very rare. Apparently they only made 43 sedans and somewhere around 50 pickups. Most of them were the light van, which they called the SL model. 1 month into production, they also added a delivery van body style, the SD. This one is a little more recognizable as a van. In April of 1956, displacement went up ever so slightly due to a small increase in the engine bore, and horsepower went up by 2. Still less horsepower than some farms I've been to. They also replaced all the suspension with leaf springs because apparently the more modern suspension style was not able to cope with Japanese roads at the time. The interior was very, very basic. The only gauges were a speedo and an amp meter. I guess these early two-strokes didn't get fuel gauges. I wonder if there was like a dipstick on the cap or something. By 1958, sales were still very slow and they cut the line down to just the SL light van. Although this body style was only a 2-seater, a rear seat could be installed by owners to avoid extra taxation. I already talked about how the People's Car Plan ended up being cancelled because no one was able to meet the criteria. As you can see in this video, pretty much none of these cars would have even qualified for it. They were all way more than 150,000 yen, seating for 4 was questionable at best, and 100 kilometers an hour was a bit of a stretch for most of them. Suzulights had a top speed of about 80.
Punch it, Margaret!
In late 1959, the Suzulight SF series was replaced by the TL series, sometimes called the Suzulight 360. This one came in only one body style with a split folding rear seat and the ability to carry 1 cubic meter of cargo. Hey, that's 50% more than the SF, okay? The interior was still very sparse, but they did now have a fuel gauge. The engine was mostly carried over but lightly modified and now outputting a whole 20 horses. In late 1960, they released the TL2, which had some improvements like a new steel grille, chrome rub strips on the bumpers. This car doesn't really have bumpers, does it? In late 1961, the TL3 came out, which featured a fully synchronized 4-speed transmission, a new dash, a new grille, and new taillights. The new tailgate was a horizontally split 2-piece. You'll have to forgive the 240p, there weren't very many pictures out there of this iteration. In 1962, a new passenger car was launched off this platform, the Suzulight Front TLA. In 1963, the TL series got a new engine, still an air-cooled 2-stroke with the same power rating, but like we saw in the Subaru, it now had a separate fuel tank for oil and used Suzuki's patented cell mix inlet automatic lubrication system. How convenient! There was still a basic trim available at a lower price point without the automatic lubrication system. In 1964, the rear end was redesigned again, now very square with openable sliding rear windows. In 1965, the front end was revised and the headlights were now contained within the grille. Production on the 360 van would come to an end in 1969. By this time, the front TLA had evolved into the Suzuki Front 360, now branded as a Suzuki, and this was the end of the Suzulight nameplate. Yes, we're doing prints. In case anyone doesn't know, in 1966, Prince merged with Nissan, but before that they made cars on their own. Some pretty iconic Nissan models originated as Prince product lines. The Gloria, the Laurel, and the Skyline to name a few. Now they actually had a ton of different mergers and name changes prior to becoming part of Nissan, but to give you a very abridged history, they started off as a division of a Japanese aircraft manufacturer that built planes during World War II, but then dissolved after the war. They diversified into making electric vehicles in the late 40s under the name Tama Electric Car Company because gasoline was very expensive prior to the Korean War. But in 1950, when the Korean War broke out, batteries became expensive and gasoline was much cheaper. So they started making real cars, and the first one came out in 1952. At this point, they changed their name to Fuji Precision Industries, and the car was named the Prince Sedan. Hey, wait a minute, you said they made electric cars. This isn't their first production car then. Wouldn't that be one of their electric cars? Well, you might be technically right, but aside from a serious lack of information available on those, this is not an EV-friendly channel, and trust me, the Prince Sedan is way cooler. It's actually the predecessor to the Prince Skyline. You need to change your attitudes on EVs. Don't you know EVs are the future? The 1952 Prince Sedan. In the theme of borrowing, the styling for their first sedan was very European inspired, and the engine was an enlarged and modified Peugeot 202 engine engine. It was a 1.5 liter outputting 45 horsepower, and after the cars we've been looking at so far, well, that just seems like a ton of power, doesn't it? It's an overhead valve engine, an inline 4, and the engine code is FG4A. F for the company name at the time, Fuji Precision Machine, G for gasoline engine, and A because it was their first one. This same engine was also used in the Subaru 1500 prototype I mentioned in a previous chapter that never made it to production. How nice that we're all sharing. It's got kind of a cool look to it. It's not as flashy or as beautiful as an American 50s car, of course, but hey, compared to most of what we've been looking at so far, this is pretty nice. I unfortunately really wasn't able to find any kind of an interior shot, but I did find some cool brochure scans. There was also a van version and even a truck of sorts, which is pretty cool. Couldn't really find much on those. I think they were just known as the Prince truck at the time. The chassis code for the Prince sedan is AISH, and the first update comes for 1954, now known as the AISH2. They didn't really change the styling for this one or anything, they just took advantage of changing Japanese legislation that allowed them to make the car about 2 inches taller and about 2.5 inches wider. And yes, a prince did drive the Prince. Here is Prince Akihito in front of his Prince in 1954. The AISH3 came out in 1955. They changed the grille design on this one and the side stripe, but this iteration was very short-lived, only staying in production for 2 months before the AISH4 came out. There were no additional styling changes, but the engine was modified with a new cylinder head design which increased horsepower to 52.
Punch it, Margaret!
The AISH5 comes out for 1956. There are some styling changes this time, perhaps the most significant update, a very noticeable different grille with a little V-shape in it, and the side stripe angles upwards at a 45-degree angle across the driver's door. They also introduced a new two-tone paint color option. This wasn't no peasant car, alright? No mechanical changes this time, but there is a new upper deluxe model added, which comes with such luxuries as a radio, white wall tires, and a sun visor mounted on the exterior. In late 56, I'm assuming as a 57 model, the AISH6 came out, and models with two-tone paint now have the colors reversed. The dominant color is now on top and the contrast color on the bottom. Engine power increases again to 60 horses, this time thanks to higher compression and improved fuel quality becoming available in Japan, and the car is now capable of 125 kilometers an hour. Eventually. 1957 was the final year for the Prince sedan, and the Prince Skyline went into production in April of that year. Don't worry, we'll dive deep and include the Prince Skyline when I eventually do a Skyline video. Toyota got their first production car out back in the 1930s, prior to all the key car regulations. As such, it's something that looks a little bit more, well, like an American car actually. Meet the 1936 Toyota Model AA. It was Toyota with a D back then, the family name of the founder. However, by August of 1937, the brand became Toyota with a T because it was visually simpler to write and took 8 brush strokes, which was considered a lucky number. Also, apparently Toyota, pronounced with a D, means fertile rice paddies, so I guess that wasn't ideal. Unlike some of the tiny little key cars we've seen in previous chapters, this one is quite elegant looking. It's even got a hood ornament. Another one that's not for the peasants. It's a 4-door sedan with rear-hinged back doors and in many ways bears resemblance to the DeSoto Airflow. And that's not a coincidence. Toyota purchased one and disassembled it to study prior to building the Model AA. Now I do want to point out that all of the color photos you're seeing are reproduction models. This car was extinct by the 1980s. In fact, in 1987, Toyota wanted to restore one for its 50th birthday, but couldn't find one, so they had to build a replica model instead. As far as we know, only one surviving AA model exists, and it was discovered in Russia in 2008, which is interesting because they were never officially exported to Russia, and it's now in a museum. Here it is. As you can see, it's a little rough. though still cleaner than some of the project cars you'll find on Marketplace. Hey bro, I know what I got. One of one, first ever Toyota model right here. No lowballs, my loss, your gain. 95% of the way to collector's plates. Just needs like a polish maybe and like a couple minor parts, which I would totally replace if I had the time. I just don't have the time, bro, so I'm taking a loss on this. Hurry up and buy it before I change my mind. Oh, and bring your own rollers. I can't include the wheels at that price. The engine in this car was Toyota's first production engine, which they designated the Type A engine. It was an overhead valve cast iron inline six and was essentially a copy of Chevrolet's stove bolt engine from the time. So much so that Toyota used the same supplier for parts, and many of the parts, including pistons, push rods, valves, etc., could be used interchangeably between the engines. The Toyota engine produced about 61 horsepower, which is just slightly higher than the Chevy engine due to a modified intake manifold. But of course, who knows how they were measuring these numbers back then? They have to be taken with a grain of salt. The transmission was a 3-speed manual. The interior of the replica model looks very classy, but it seems somewhat different from the layout of the original interior. I wish I could see a better picture of this. In the center, it looks like you had a pretty decent complement of analog gauges, which they combined into larger circles in the replica model. Toyota produced a total of 1,404 of these from 1936 to 1943. They also made 353 AB models, which were the same but a convertible, and there was an ABR military version as well. Nissan has a bit of a complicated history with its branding. The company as we know it today is the result of many mergers and takeovers, so to find their first production car we have to go back in time to well before they were producing cars under the name Nissan. The vehicle I would consider to be the company's first production vehicle is the 1930 Datsun Type 10, but I want to jump back in time just a bit before that to explain how this vehicle came to be. Long before the Nissan name was ever used, the origins of Datsun can be traced all the way back to the 1910s. A gentleman by the name of Sojiro Hashimoto started a business called with the goal of producing the first Japanese-built car. His first successful prototype was completed in 1914 called the Model 31. He didn't have the finances to put this or any car into production, so he sought investors to get the company up and running. Once he got his first 3 investors, the company name was changed to DAT, which was an acronym of the first 3 investors' surnames. DAT was also the Japanese word for quick rabbit or a hare, giving the automotive company a link to a fast animal. Datsun continued to build some other prototypes throughout the 1920s, as well as trucks for the military, since there wasn't really much of a consumer passenger car market in Japan yet. In the late 1920s, DAT decided to try building a smaller, lower-priced car. This resulted in the DAT 91 prototype, which they called the Datsun, spelt with an O, meaning son of Dat. This prototype was completed in 1929 and considered a success, so they put it into production as the Datsun 10 in 1930. A lot of sources online today say they only sold 10 of these, but according to a cool site I found on the Wayback Machine called earlydatsun.com, which I'll link in the description, it was just 10 units they sold in 1930, but production of the Datsun 10 continued into 1931, when production apparently ramped up quite a bit, although the actual production numbers for that year are not known. Frankly, I'm much more inclined to believe this site than Wikipedia or any modern articles, because you can tell whoever made this site back in the day was real passionate about early Datsuns. So I think we can probably consider this Datsun's first production vehicle. It had a 495cc side valve 4-cylinder engine which produced about 10 horsepower and was paired to a 3-speed manual transmission. There were quite a few different body styles, including this open top model, this one which was considered a delivery van model, and a roadster, although it's not clear if any roadster models were ever actually sold. That one may have just been a prototype. 1931 is also the year they changed the spelling of Datsun to use a U, because sun, S-O-N, sounds like the word meaning loss, and that was taken as a very bad omen when a hurricane destroyed their factory in 1931. Sun, S-U-N, now paid homage to the rising Japanese sun. In 1932, they released their second model, the Datsun Type 11, and with this one, production ramped up to about 150. It's also the first model to wear the Datsun badge spelt with a U, and this badge should look familiar because it's pretty much the same logo that Datsun and Nissan would continue to use all the way into the 80s and even early 90s. It continued to use the 495cc inline 4 with a 3-speed manual, and this model also came in a variety of body styles, including an open top, a sedan, a roadster, a coupe, and a delivery van. Prior to 1933, Japanese laws didn't require you to have a license to operate a motor vehicle with an engine displacement of 500cc or less, hence the 495cc early Datsun engines. In 1933, this law was revised upwards to 750cc, so Datsun took advantage of this by releasing the Datsun 12 in 1933, which was very similar to the Datsun 11 but used a 747cc engine producing a rocketing 12 horsepower.
Punch it, Margaret!
The Datsun 13 went into production in April of 1934, and this one had a little bit of a different look to it. It's kind of cool, I think. It used the same engine as the Datsun 12, so this one was mostly a styling revision. They produced about 880 of these, and it became the first Datsun to be exported in numbers greater than 1, with an estimated 44 total exports of these going to countries like South Africa and Australia. The Datsun 14 went into production in 1935, and I wanted to make it all the way up to this model in this chapter because this model has the distinction of being considered the first mass-produced car in Japan. 3,800 of these were built between 1935 and 1936 at Nissan's new Yokohama factory. It used a new 722cc engine, slightly smaller than the previous year, but despite that it was actually slightly more powerful, outputting a whole 15 horsepower. Allegedly, the Datsun 14 could make it to a top speed of 50 miles an hour, probably on a downhill. There's actually some really nice restored examples of this vehicle still in existence. It had a lot of really nice chrome touches. And check out this awesome hair hood ornament. This model is considered to be the zenith of pre-war Datsuns because when the Datsun 15 came out in 1936, it was mechanically very similar to the 14, but the interior was much more sparse and the vehicle had much less chrome trim and detail because these materials became much harder to obtain after the war with China started. The first Mitsubishi production car came out all the way back in 1917, and this one is usually credited as the first serious production car in Japan. Meet the Mitsubishi Model A. Built by Mitsubishi Shipbuilding Company at their shipyard in Kobe, Japan. Mitsubishi's fourth president and nephew of the company's founder saw the potential motorized vehicles could have on Japan's economy, so he set out to have one built. But at this time in history, Japan did not have really any motor vehicle experience, certainly not with passenger cars. They had no design drawings available to them and had little experience with automobile construction or gasoline engines. So they took a Fiat Tipo 3, a European car of the time which was being imported to Japan, disassembled it and studied it closely. As a result, the Model A is based on the Tipo 3, and you can see the resemblance. The Model A was built entirely by hand. The body was constructed of sheet metal, beaten by hand and affixed to a wooden frame. The interior was made from lacquered white cypress and luxury British woolen cloth. The headlights were gas lanterns. The interior was quite lavish since the Model A was envisioned as a luxury vehicle to transport government officials and top executives. Horseless carriages were not basic transportation in 1917. The cast iron engine was a 2.8-liter four-cylinder, and there isn't a ton of info that's still known about it, but it's believed to have made about 35 horsepower. Now, when crediting this as the first Japanese production car, it's important to note what is the definition of production. In this case, it's only 22 units. That's right, 22 of these were built between 1917 and 1921. But remember, these were built entirely by hand with no specialized tools or production lines. This led to the Model A's demise because this made it very expensive to produce, and it couldn't compete with the cheaper American and European competition. As you can imagine, with having a century passed since its 22-unit model run, these went extinct many decades ago. As a result, some of the pictures you're seeing are a replica model that Mitsubishi built in 1972 with more modern materials. The replica model is slightly smaller and is powered by the modern for the time KE43 engine, which was being used in the Colt 1000. In 2017, to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Model A, and as a marketing gimmick for their plug-in hybrid Outlander, Mitsubishi partnered with West Coast Customs to create this abomination, the Model A. I don't know if I've ever seen something worse than this. We're actually not quite done yet. Mitsubishi won't approve of this because they like having the title of first, but I actually have one more quick one to show you guys. Meet the 1907 Takuri. I have no idea if that's how you're supposed to say that. This is the actual first Japanese-built gasoline engine car. It was assembled using some local parts, but allegedly also some imported engine and chassis parts from Ford Model Ts, at least in the first few examples. Now, they only made somewhere around 10 or 12 of these, but if 22 Mitsubishi Model A's count, well, I think this does too. And they at least sold one of them, look, as a delivery vehicle for the country's largest brewery. No surviving examples of these exist today, of course, although the Toyota Auto Museum does have a replica. It had a twin-cylinder side valve engine and is believed to have made somewhere between 8 and 12 horsepower. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the first production model from every major Japanese brand, plus a few bonus models. This is a bit different from any video I've done before so far, so I have no idea if anyone's actually going to watch this.